Hello, everyone. We're just gonna letting some people in. We'll start in just a minute with the talk. Okay, one more and then I'll get started. There we go. All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's lunchtime lecture, discussing the current exhibition that is on display in the museum, Reaction, Art, Politics, and Social Critique in the United States. Before I introduce our guest speakers, I would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous peoples on which ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. Just a few housekeeping Zoom things before we get started. This is the Zoom meeting format, so please make sure your microphone is muted. We will be addressing questions at the end of the program, and please feel free to enter any questions or comments in the chat as the speakers are presenting, and we will get to those. We are pleased to provide closed captioning during the program. If you would like to view closed captioning, please click the CC Live transcript button in the toolbar and select Show Subtitle. So our exhibition, Reaction, draws from the Syracuse University Art Museum's rich collection of art that critically engages with social and political issues. Curated by Associate Professor of Art History, Sascha Scott, and her art history graduate students, this exhibition developed out of the fall 2020 course where the students examined, researched, and wrote on works included in the exhibition. Today, Sascha Scott, Willow Gritzmaker, and Mariah Ribeiro will discuss the exhibition and their research. So I will be handing it over to them. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emily. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can look at some images while we talk. Okay, and somebody will let me know if this doesn't happen to be forwarding. So as Emily said, I am Sascha Scott. I'm an associate professor in art history in the Department of Art and Music Histories. And I also want to acknowledge that I am currently seated on the unceded lands of the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee. And as Emily also said, I'm here with two graduate students, Mariah and Willow. And they're finishing up their first year in our program. So we're going to tell you about the exhibition that a class of 5 graduate students co-curated in the fall. And this exhibition, the title you see here, Reaction, it addresses the art, politics, and social critique in the United States. And it's currently on view at the SU Art Museum. So first I'll tell you a little more about how this exhibition came to be, and then we're going to look at some of the art in the exhibition. So for many years now, the SU Art Museum has supported our department's mission of teaching students through hands-on learning with art objects. So each fall, we have a pro seminar for incoming graduate students in art history. And as part of this course, they co-curate an exhibition together. And the course is really aimed to hone their research and writing skills. And what happens is we have to know the works of art well before the class starts. So I usually, when I'm the professor for this, select these works around now, the spring before. And originally I had planned for us to work on the illustrations by a really important American artist named John Sloan, whose work I just love. But then in the spring and the summer, the Black Lives Matter protests swept the nation, and it's a movement that demands change. And so the SU Art Museum graciously allowed me to shift course to choose art in an exhibition theme that was more relevant to our current social and political moment. And it ends up, as I looked into making this change, the museum has a rich collection of art that engages with issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, state-sanctioned violence, structural injustice, and media control. So these were the works, and the students sort of come in the first week, and you actually see here them on the second week. And during the first week, they're assigned 2 works of art, really Sometimes it's by choice, sometimes it's by lottery, sometimes they switch who gets what. But throughout the course of the semester, they research and write about these objects for the exhibition. And we work in the museum throughout the semester, so first week, second week, and then they can come back whenever they really want to re-engage with their objects as they refine their ideas. And the students are true co-curators. They are collaborators who share their research, they exchange ideas, they critique each other and peer review each other's work. And I want to just for a second here, pause to offer my sincere thanks to the entire SU Art Museum staff. Not only because every year they support the educational mission of my department, we curate shows with our senior art history majors too, but this year was particularly challenging because of COVID, and they did find a safe way for us to access the collection in person, which you see during a really challenging time, and not all units on campus were able to do that. So here you see the installation of the show. And just to give you an overview of all the works before we talk about a few of them, all of the works in the show were created between 1930 and 2020. And so the exhibition illuminates the long tradition of visual resistance in the United States, with each generation building on, refining, and sometimes projecting the actions and reactions, so that's the title of the exhibition, the reactions of artists and activists who came before them. So the works that we're going to talk about variously call the viewer to action, honor those who have fought against injustice, and also highlight the cost of inaction. And so here I'm going to give you an overview, and then the students will talk about some of their work. So as Emily suggested, we critically engage with the works of art in the SU Art Museum collection. And here we were just sort of trying to think about both the power and the paradoxes of social and political critiques by these artists. So the print you see here challenges widespread hate and violence against LGBTQ plus communities. And this is by Amos Paul Kennedy, and he proclaims equal rights are not special rights. The other artworks also featured in this exhibition similarly advocate for human rights and highlight forces that stand in the way. So here you see two works by two internationally important artists, Carrie Weems and Kara Walker. And in these works, they interrogate dominant representations and histories of Black Americans. And in both of these works, they mobilize memory making as a mode of resistance. And Willow's going to talk more about the Weems in greater detail in a minute. These challenges to dominant and oppressive representations of Blackness have a long history. And we see this in this print by Calvin Burnett. This is a really powerful portrait of a Black freedom fighter, which I'll also give you more information about. These are works by Ben Shahn and James Rosenquist, who in both of these, they're questioning state power and policy. So Shahn in this work, and it's based on a 1932 painting, a series of paintings. He's protesting the execution of two anarchists. And this is a mural that actually stands on our campus, which we're quite proud to have. Rosenquist's work comments on his arrest for 10 days when he was protesting the Vietnam War. Contemporary artists also question the injustice and violence sanctioned by, and facilitated by the state. And we see this in the work by Leonard Peltier. And he's a Chippewa painter whose work engages with his own incarceration. But also we see this in the work of Dr. Eric Avery, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Avery later. Mae Stevens offers a different perspective on the same theme by focusing on blind acceptance of governmental power. The student who worked on this, Maddie, excuse me, offers a different perspective on the same theme. Let me start again. Calling Maddie by the wrong name just threw me off. Okay, so she found that the white man in the middle represents the artist's father, who was unquestioning of state violence, and Stevens transforms him into a paper doll, who could easily fit into the transmutable roles of executioner, soldier, policeman, and butcher. Other artists in this exhibition, including the surrealist photographer Barbara Morgan, nun, pop artist Sister Corda Kent, and pop artist Robert Rauschenberg, debate the promises and pitfalls of free speech, which both can lead to positive change and to media manipulation and social control. And we're going to hear more about the Kent and the Rauschenberg. And this paradox is relevant to a print by Andy Warhol, who both questioned and capitalized on the media's sensationalist tactics when reporting on racialized violence. So for these short lunchtime lectures, only a few of the students can formally present their work. It's too short of a time for them all to do it, but I want to say that all of these students were just a pleasure to work with and wrote really thoughtful wall texts. So after we hear from Willow and Mariah, I'm going to touch on the work that some of the artists did. And some of them are online today, so if you have a question, hopefully they can answer the questions you have about a particular work of art. And so with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to, Mariah.
Thank you, Sascha. Okay, hello, I'm Mariah Ribeiro. I'm a first year's master's candidate and teaching assistant here in the Art and Music History department. My research interests are modern and contemporary art that provide insight into cultural norms and underlying power structures. And I focus mostly on American and Native American art of the 20th and 21st century. One of the artworks I had an opportunity to research and work with for reaction was Men Are Never So Likely by Sister Corda Kent. Corda Kent was a student, nun, and teacher at Immaculate Heart College and was a part of the pop art movement of the 1960s. She's known for constantly incorporating words, letters, poems, texts, and literature within her artwork, as well as critically engaging with mass media and advertisement, as was typical of pop artists. Kent made Men Are Never So Likely as a commissioned advertisement for the media conglomerate Westinghouse Broadcasting Company in 1968. Within the serigraph version we have on display at the museum, the white cursive words, "Men are never so likely to answer a question rightly as when they discuss it freely," descend the flat orange background of the silkscreen print. A layer of black paint sits atop the orange, encroaching on the words written in Kent's script and give the impression of a burned-through celluloid photograph. Although the work is comprised mostly of abstract color blocks, Kent roots this work in the concrete world through her appropriation of British Whig politician Thomas Macaulay's words. The 19th century liberal imperialist gentle platitude becomes a passage through which Kent invites us to engage with tangible political principles. 1968 was a tumultuous year, both socio-politically and personally for Kent. The year was marred by the horrors of the Vietnam War, the assassination of both Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy, and the escalating violence between students, anti-war and civil rights protesters, and the police. This was also the same year Kent would leave the Sister of Immaculate Heart after 32 years due to a rift between the liberal order, as she was a part of, and the traditionalist Archbishop of Los Angeles. Yet in this turmoil, Kent makes a clear, strong democratic appeal, reminding us that solutions to conflict come only when everyone is given space to speak. The artwork is bold, loud, and packs a visual punch. The bright orange is attention-grabbing, and the contrasting colors provide enough movement and dynamism to the print. Although simple, it is not boring. Therefore, the bright colors and abstract forms are restrained just enough as not to distract from the message at hand. It is a great advertisement. What it advertises, though, is not Westinghouse as a company, but free speech as a consumable concept product. By marketing the idea of free speech in lieu of a company, Kent practices what she called, quote, idea infiltration, which helped people to use their whole selves better, end quote. Consequently, Kent uses Westinghouse as a platform for her own beliefs. She does so not only through the overt use of Macaulay's idiom about free speech, but through the visual rhetoric of the artwork. Despite Men Are Never So Likely's tactical employment of ideal infiltration, i.e. propaganda, Kent's corporate commissions perplexed her friends, since most of her artwork functioned as a critical examination of the 1960s consumer culture. Their confusion overlooks the fact that pop artists constantly blurred the line between the critique and propagation of mass consumer culture. For her part, Kent considered commissions as a powerful site of communication and opportunities to promote social justice. Her involvement with a media company is not negated by her practice's sly subversion of consumerism, but it can be interpreted as a reclamation of power from a capitalist media conglomerate. No matter the rhetorical effects of Kent's work as an advertisement, subversive or otherwise, she leaves us with a visually impactful artwork that softly compels its viewers to take a political stance. Having this artwork in our museum was really important for me as a researcher and writer. Before this exhibition, I knew very little about Coretta Kent, although I do think she's being recovered more and more when people talk about her, about pop art. Her career and legacy as an artist has yet to be fully reinstated. Kent was a popular artist who was doing very innovative and subversive work, both artistically and politically. And this print really represents what she saw as one of her best contributions, which was opening dialogue and engaging viewers by any means necessary. When I was first tasked to do research for the serigraph, the print's date and history was a giant question mark. But because this print is a part of our museum and I felt so personally involved with this project, it has really allowed me to do some of my best research to date. And seeing the fruits of our class's semester-long efforts are really satisfactory, both for me and for my fellow students. Thanks.
My mute button disappeared and I could not find it. I found it though. So now I'm going to introduce you to Willow. So Willow, go ahead.
Right, thank you, Sascha. Hello, I'm Willow Gritzmaker. I'm a first-year graduate student and teaching assistant in the art history program here at Syracuse. My research interests are also centered on American Indigenous and settler art made from the 19th century onward, as well as intersections between art history and visual culture. I wrote on Carrie Weems' 2016 artwork, All the Boys Blocked One, for both our seminar last fall and the exhibition Reaction, which was our final product. All the Boys Blocked One is a diptych consisting of a blurred blue portrait photograph and an enlarged photocopy of a booking sheet. Weems redacts both sides of the diptych through the addition of opaque pigment. The portrait sitter to the left is made unknowable by the addition of a red square over his face. On the right, the language of an officially redacted document is imitated by Weems by obscuring parts of the booking sheet. Weems brings the intentionally obscured elements of the diptych into dialogue with the parts that still hint at the individuality of the subjects. A closer examination of the right panel of the diptych reveals that the booking sheet comes from Sandra Bland's 2015 arrest. Bland's death in police custody became a key point in the fight to recognize the impact of police brutality on Black women in the United States, a key piece of the larger Black Lives Matter movement. The boxes that detail the arrest have been filled in with black, and the booking sheet has the booking photograph has likewise been excised through the addition of a black square. The viewer is left with only basic details of Bland's identity and a disconcertingly frank list of the items that were taken from her. A booking sheet is an incomplete record of the person it aims to catalog, even without the intervention of an artist. Weems highlights the inaccurate and reductive quality of these documents, often used by the state, through obscuring some of the sparse details that it recorded. The portrait photograph is similarly used to show an identity hidden and to hint at the presence of a fuller picture intentionally obscured. Weems' photograph is softly focused, and the identity of the sitter cannot be interpreted through the opaque red square over the lower half of his face. The sitter is, however, an individual. He is wearing a patterned hoodie and seated with his hands folded in his lap in a pose reminiscent of studio portraiture. A portrait photograph is intended to show and preserve the identity of the sitter. Weems interrupts this process through her additions, allowing only hints of humanity to appear in the details. These details and obstructions work against the viewer's expectations of a portrait. Instead, a gap is once again brought into focus by this panel. Viewed together, the photograph and booking sheet both function as forms of redacted portraits. This concept is paradoxical, but speaks to the ways in which state-produced information controls the public view of police brutality victims. In my essay, Against Forgetting, Memory and Mourning as Resistance in Carrie Mae Weems' All the Boys Blocked One, I argue that Weems importantly uses this diptych to suggest how these narratives may be countered. My research led me to view this artwork as situated within Weems' larger practice of visual resistance through art. Her work, characterized by her use of photographs and effective handling of color, offers strategies to resist dominant power systems, as well as the narratives that those systems weave to retain their power. In both photograph and booking sheet, the humanity of the subject is present despite obscured identities. Folded hands and a list of items like a colorful dress remind the viewer of a basic but crucial fact. The victims of police violence are people, regardless of how the state attempts to craft alternative narratives around them. I go on to argue that this artwork speaks to the radical potential of memory and mourning in resisting these narratives, two acts which hinge upon being able to maintain a sense of the humanity of the victims of police violence. Researching this artwork over the course of a full semester provided a number of instances for me as a graduate student to hone my research and writing skills. Having the time to work in depth with an artwork, to approach writing about it from a variety of angles, and to really engage with the materials that I was using in my research allowed me to produce what I feel was a very strong understanding of what I was writing about. As a first-year student, I think it's crucial to have an opportunity like this where you can familiarize yourself as a researcher with, for instance, the resources at our disposal through the library, and additionally, the depth of the collections here at the Syracuse University Art Museum. The summons search is the backbone of a lot of research that a graduate student might be doing here in the program, so learning it at an early point is important, as is getting to know the other databases that the library provides access to. Our experiences at the museum were also exceptional. Being able to write about works that we were able to see here on campus during our research process benefited all of us as we began our graduate education. Above all else, I think that it feels very rewarding to put a great amount of effort into different forms of writing and research and have that result in an actual exhibition with our texts on the wall. Thank you.
Thank you, Willow. And again, thanks to you both. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your research with us. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you a work that each of the other students wrote about and tell you a little very quickly in the time left about what they wrote. So the student that wrote about this work of art is Rachel Hickman, and it's a really powerful lithograph by Calva and Burnett. It's created on paper. It's a monumental bust-length portrait, and it depicts a young woman gazing to the side. And if you look at the inscription below, the inscription labels her as a freedom fighter for Operation Exodus. So Rachel first had to know what that was, and she learned that Operation Exodus was a community organization led by Black mothers in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts. So this portrait honors one of these freedom fighting mothers. As Rachel learned, schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods of Boston were underfunded and overcrowded. And so Operation Exodus used a loophole in the Boston School Board's policy to hire buses to shuttle Black students to predominantly white schools. And that is because these white schools had open availability, were properly funded, and thus provided a better education for Black children. If you look closely, you see a great amount of detail in the texture of her face and her hair. This creates a sense of energy and movement. And Rachel also saw the woman's partially open mouth as emphasizing her voice in these protests as she fights for a better education for Black children. Steph Adams conducted research, another student, on this screen print by Robert Rauschenberg, a tremendously well-known pop artist. And this print is part of the Surface series. It's a screen print that overlays images of contemporary newspaper clippings. And if you can see, the clippings appear as photographic negatives. And as a result, the headlines are these bright white text that sort of pops out from the work, and it really catches the viewer's eye. It was really difficult to see on the screen, but Steph did go and figure out what all of these headlines announced, and some are anti-war marches, labor strikes, about pollution, scandals in the Catholic Church, integration in the South, drug use, and car crashes. Layered among these headlines are references to popular culture, including a basketball player, a fist symbolizing political solidarity, and advertisements for food and cameras and home appliance. Rauschenberg's print simulates the sort of quick and constant current of information, entertainment, and advertisements delivered to the public by the media. And as the title proposes, these layers of information often rest on the surface, with the media intermixing eye-catching headlines that announce national crises with flashy advertisements. Rauschenberg's disorderly arrangement suggests how deep engagement with the news, especially during tumultuous times, can be overwhelming. And I think that point is certainly relevant to today. What Steph argues is that the Surface series asks viewers to recognize the capitalist interests of news corporations. And the print also challenges viewers to participate in the sustained looking and critical thinking required to see beyond the surface. So this was a work of art that was written about by Madeline Thomas, and it is a block print called Dear George, and it's by Dr. Eric Avery. And so here you see 247, she counted them, Black coffins stamped on a large piece of white handmade paper. And so to create this work, Avery had to hand carve the coffins into a large linoleum plate. Avery is a physician and an artist activist, and he is deeply immersed in both medicine and politics. And what this print does is memorialize the victims of government-sanctioned violence. Madeline found that Avery borrowed the form of this coffin from Revolutionary War broadsides. And these broadsides memorialize the deaths of American colonists at the hands of the British Army. Now, this work is addressed to President George W. Bush and offers a powerful critique of destructive government policies. Madeline explains that Avery uses the symbol of the coffin to confront President Bush with the shocking truth about mass casualties caused by his administration. The deaths variously refer to what many in the US believed was an unnecessary and unwinnable global war on terror, but also those deaths caused by Bush's policies that restricted access to treatment for HIV and AIDS in Africa and the Caribbean. And it's worth noting that as she researched this print, she actually reached out to the artists and had many fruitful email exchanges with Dr. Avery, who offered really new insights into this print. So Maddie Subadar, so she's actually an MA student in museum studies, and she's actually online today, so she can answer questions for you. But Maddie actually joined the Pro Seminar with us, and we're really happy to have her. And she thoughtfully wrote about this very famous screen print by Andy Warhol. The screen print appropriates the photograph by Charles Moore of what was dubbed by the press as the Birmingham race riot. And the photograph appeared, when it appeared in reverse in a 1963 issue of Life magazine. Now, as Maddie learned, the image is part of a photo essay that documented Black protesters being attacked by law enforcement in Birmingham, Alabama. And this image has become a symbol of racially motivated police violence during the civil rights era. So if you see, if you make your way through this image, the black man at center with his back to the viewer, and I can show you with my mouse, is being attacked by two police dogs. And one dog bares his fangs as he lunges at the man, while the other one bites the man's pants. So you can see the dogs here and here, and it's causing his clothing to rip. The police in the photo have their weapons out, and so you can see that right here in front. And you see the onlookers in the back who are really unable to intervene as the violence unfolds. So this screen print is part of Warhol's Death and Disaster series, a very famous series by this pop artist. And it's considered to be one of his most political prints. And Maddie really thought about what this meant. So she explained that the nature of Warhol's political critiques are contested, that scholars have argued that, like many pop artists, Warhol's art offers a sometimes witty, sometimes dark critique of American consumerism. So owing to the fame of this photograph and image, this print spotlights police violence. It also suggests that racism and racially motivated violence has been commodified for white middle-class Americans. And it also shows, or Warhol might be showing, that this commodification is what it took for Americans to notice this violence. And yet, as Maddie also points out, the print's title also perpetuates dominant racial biases, which were reinforced by the media. The civil unrest in Birmingham was a peaceful protest turned violent owing to police aggression. By framing what happened as a riot, the media, and then by extension Warhol, perpetuates false narratives about Black people provoking violence in instances when they are defending themselves against it. So I want to thank you, Willow and Mariah, again for sharing your work, and to the rest of the students for their hard work on this really important exhibition. And I also should thank graduating MA student Kate Hill, who was a guest curator, and she wrote about the Peltier painting when I came in and asked her to do that. So I'm really proud of what these students accomplished. I hope anybody who can will check out the show. And now I'm going to end the slideshow. So if anybody has any questions, you can ask me or ask the student, including students who were part of the class who are online. Thank you. I'll open it to questions. I have 2 questions for the students too, but I would love to hear from audience members first. And you can either raise your hand or chat a question. Well, I have a question for each of them as I was sort of listening to your talks. So Mariah, can you tell us a little bit about the sort of complexity added by where that quote came from for your work? And I'll put the work up so we know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I can try to do my best. So the quote comes from a British politician, Thomas Macaulay, and he's a Whig politician in the 1800s, and he really had an imperialist mindset where he thought that India should always stay under Britain's rule, that it was important for more sophisticated cultures to have a good handle on less sophisticated cultures in order to usher things like democracy to them. So I think when anyone first reads this quote, like I said, they're invited to agree with it kind of mildly. Like, I don't think many people would disagree with the fact that free speech is good. Some people would, but not many. But the more research I did, the more I realized that this is really coming from a man. These words come from a man who I don't think supported free speech in the way we recognize it today, of like freedom, not only of the press, but of marginalized people to speak truth to power. So it really complicates the layers of the text historically, like when quotes like this are not researched by the artists who are using them.
Yeah, so thank you so much. It was really a good thing that you grappled with all summer, so, or summer, fall. I'm just dreaming of summer, that's all. So thank you. Um, and then I'm going to ask Willow a question, then I'll read Bill's comment. So Willow, this diptych was part of a greater series of works. I just thought that you might say a little bit about it. It wasn't a standalone thing.
Yeah, it actually is part of that greater series, and specifically, I believe I can't remember the exact number, but there are a few other pieces in the series that look just like this diptych setup. There's like, an obscured portrait and then a booking sheet or another form of like official documentation from a police station that's been altered. But additionally, there are also a few other photographic pieces that appear as well in the series, depending on how it is shown. Sometimes they're just the portraits that have been obscured. And I believe there's also a video element that is often shown. I know the video was also at the museum at the time, but they're all still part of that larger conversation of like resistance through memory and kind of the persistence of both these harmful state-sponsored narratives, so to speak, and also the capacity for people to resist them through kind of seeing through the illusion of those obscured ideas of people.
Great, thanks. So Bill has our own Bill, the candy god formerly, and beloved department administrator. It says, Sister Coretta's screen print reminded me of Professor Sally Cornelison, who mentioned, so Sally gave a talk, I think last week, about the contributions of the nuns to Italian Renaissance art. And so he's wondering if you discovered other sisters engaging in the art of protest in the 1960s. So is she got other nuns, or is this sort of like she's sort of this radical person?
Actually, she's a part of a community of very liberal radical nuns, I would say. So she was a part of Immaculate Heart College, and all of the nuns there were constantly grinding up against the archbishop's desire for them to be like just doing their nun things, and they were protesting. They were putting on festivals to both celebrate their Catholic heritage, but also really draw attention to things like the beginning of the Vietnam War and drafting on campus and stuff like this. So she's part of a culture, and she helped teach other nuns to be politically engaged artists. So it's not just her. There's a lot going on in this moment.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have a question for our students? Or me, it's fine too. Oh, Kelly. Okay, so this was to the co-curators, the students. And so were there any surprises you discovered when researching your artwork that perhaps shifted your understanding of the works you were working on? And Willow, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I can. Actually, for me, because we focused on like one main artwork, but we were also doing research simultaneously on a secondary artwork. And for me, my other one was Kara Walker's. But actually researching those in tandem was how I came to the final idea of talking about memory and like the way that memory can both be used against progress and also how it can be used, to actually have a progressive aim. Because of the fact that I was noticing some scholars talking about the role of memory in what Weems was doing, but then a lot of people talked about the way Kara Walker plays with the idea of public memory and, the idea of these kind of altered or inaccurate memories that are created by dominant power systems. That's like a really key part of what Kara Walker is playing with, is kind of pointing out the absurdity of these types of like fantastical, mainly like ideas of the South that people have in their mind of the antebellum South. But I kind of was able to extrapolate that into looking at Weems through a different lens of like, well, this is about memory and the way that memory is constructed as well. So how are these two artists both in a way playing with memory or playing up or down different aspects of memory? So that was actually really surprising to me. I didn't think I would find a viewpoint that somehow managed to like encompass them both, because in a lot of ways they are very, very different in their approaches, but they're kind of united in that way. And that really helped how I thought about both of the works.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I should tell the audience that the students, the works that they're given are sometimes related, sometimes they're related by something like a coffin, sometimes, like, so one of the challenges they have is not only writing about both and researching two very different artists and works of art, but then I asked them in their catalog essay to try to put these works in conversation with each other. It's something that a curator has to do when they do an exhibition catalog. So it could be challenging, but they all really beautifully pulled this challenge off. And Mariah, is there anything you found surprising?
I discovered that Coretta Kent's Serograph was originally commissioned as a advertisement. When I first, came across it, I thought it was just a very straightforward pop piece that she started to do things like this at the end of her career. But in one late night research session right before the paper was due, I discovered it was actually an advertisement, and it really shifted how I thought about the artwork. Like, what does it mean to have an artwork paid for, about free speech paid for by a mass media conglomerate? So it plays into bigger ideas I was having about propaganda and how propaganda works within political art. But yeah, just being able to discover that was really like shocking.
Great, thank you. Sort of the pleasures and also the anxieties caused by research, where you think you have a stable understanding of what's going on, and at one point what you're researching takes a huge turn, and then you have to like decide to fight it or go with it. And my students all went with it really, really well. Any final questions before we thank the audience and let you get on with your day? Okay. Oh, Steffi. So we have alumni on. Steffi at the Everson Museum of Art. Thank you for coming. Thanks for everybody for coming. And yeah, have a great, what is it, Thursday.